Hey guys, tonight we begin with the grim, dangerous, and utterly terrifying world of the Vietnam tunnel rats. Those incredibly brave soldiers who ventured into the dark, claustrophobic labyrinths beneath Vietnam, fighting an unseen enemy in conditions that defied human endurance. While history often focuses on battles above ground, the truth is, being a Vietnam tunnel rat seriously sucked. So before we dive into the harrowing history of these underground warriors, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy our content. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always a joy to see how many people from around the world are ready for this journey. Now dim the lights, close your eyes, feel your body deeply relax, leaving the tiring day behind. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. When you think of the Vietnam War, you might imagine jungle patrols, helicopter assaults, and fierce firefights in open fields. But for the tunnel rats, war was fought inches from the enemy in absolute darkness, where every breath could be your last. It wasn't just a mission. It was a descent into a living nightmare that challenged every limit of human survival. Picture this. You're deep underground, in a tunnel so narrow you can barely breathe, surrounded by the heavy, damp earth. No light except for a fading beam, no sound but your own ragged breath, and the unsettling scuttling of unseen things. The air inside your confined space was usually thick with dust, the stench of earth, and the faint unsettling smell of whatever lay ahead. If it was suffocating above ground, it was infinitely more so down here, a polite way of saying it was a struggle for every gasp of air. Congratulations, you're a tunnel rat. Nights were the worst. Even if you were above ground, the memories of the darkness below gnawed at you. But if you were still down there, the blackness swallowed everything. The oppressive silence amplified every distant rustle, every imagined movement, turning the earth itself into a living, breathing threat. The Vietnam War was unlike any conflict the United States had fought before. It wasn't a war of front lines and clear battlefields, but a brutal, complex insurgency fought in dense jungles, rice paddies, and most uniquely beneath the very earth. While American and Allied forces possessed overwhelming firepower and aerial superiority, their enemy, the Viet Cong, were masters of adapting to their environment, turning the very landscape into their greatest weapon. Imagine, if you will, the vast green expanse of the Vietnamese countryside, seemingly peaceful from above, yet concealing an intricate, hidden world beneath. This was the genius and the terror of the Viet Cong's strategy. They built a sprawling network of underground tunnels, a subterranean labyrinth that would become legendary and horrifying in equal measure. These weren't mere foxholes. They were entire underground villages stretching for hundreds of kilometers, connecting hamlets, creating supply routes, housing hospitals, command centers, and even sleeping quarters. The most infamous of these networks was the Cu Chi tunnels, located just outside Saigon. Picture a clandestine world dug painstakingly by hand, inch by agonizing inch, sometimes for decades. These tunnels varied in depth and complexity. Some were simple, shallow burrows, while others were multi-layered marvels of engineering, often 3 or 4 levels deep, designed to withstand the heaviest bombing. Each level was a testament to human resilience and ingenuity, a grim monument to a war fought on multiple dimensions. For the Viet Cong, these tunnels were life itself. They provided refuge from aerial bombardments, enabled surprise attacks, and allowed for rapid movement and disappearance, making it almost impossible for conventional forces to pinpoint and destroy them. A company of American soldiers might sweep through a village, finding no trace of the enemy, only for the Viet Cong to emerge moments later from hidden trapdoors, striking from behind and vanishing just as quickly. The ground beneath their feet, which should have been solid, was instead a porous, dangerous enemy. This underground network presented an unprecedented challenge to the Allied forces. Surface operations, though crucial, were often met with an invisible enemy who seemed to materialize and dematerialize at will. The frustration mounted. How do you fight an enemy you cannot see? An enemy who lives beneath your feet, breathing the same air, yet completely out of reach. The tunnels had to be neutralized. They were too strategically vital, too effective in sustaining the Viet Cong's resistance. But conventional soldiers, accustomed to fighting in the open, were ill-equipped for such a task. Tanks, artillery, air support, all useless against an enemy burrowed deep within the earth. Even flamethrowers and tear gas had limited effect in the sprawling, often sealed-off passages. Thus, born out of a desperate tactical necessity, the tunnel rat emerged. Not from any grand strategic plan, but from the brutal, claustrophobic reality of the underground war. Someone had to go down there. Someone had to confront the enemy on their own terms, in their own terrifying domain. These individuals would delve into the pitch-black, suffocating passages, armed with little more than a flashlight, a pistol, and an unimaginable amount of courage. They were the eyes and ears in a world designed to blind and deafen, the spearhead into a darkness that promised death at every turn. Their mission was to map, destroy, and clear these underground strongholds, an impossible task that few could comprehend. They were asked to enter a dimension of combat so alien, so utterly opposed to human comfort and survival, that it stripped away every romanticized notion of warfare. It was a descent, not just into the earth, but into a different kind of conflict entirely, where the rules of engagement were rewritten by suffocating darkness and unseen threats. This wasn't a job for just anyone. It required a unique, almost unnatural blend of physical and mental resilience. The men who would become tunnel rats faced an environment so hostile, so utterly draining, that merely surviving a patrol was a victory. This was the grim crucible in which the legend and the horror of the tunnel rats was forged, a story of men forced to confront their deepest fears, not in a moment of battle, but as a daily, suffocating reality. Who were these men who dared to descend into such a terrifying realm? Were they fearless, adrenaline-fueled volunteers, eager for the most dangerous assignment? Or were they young, bewildered conscripts thrust into an unthinkable role with little choice in the matter? The truth, as with most things in war, was far more complex, a tapestry woven with threads of duty, desperation, unique skill sets, and sometimes simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Imagine yourself, perhaps a young man from a quiet American town, suddenly transported to the humid, hostile landscape of Vietnam. You've been trained for conventional combat, taught to fight above ground, to use the terrain for cover, to engage an enemy you can at least conceptually see. Then the call comes. A need for specialists, men who are small in stature, agile, and possess a courage that borders on the unnatural. For some, it was indeed an act of volunteering. Perhaps they felt a grim sense of duty, a belief that someone had to do it, and it might as well be them. Some might have been driven by a desire to contribute in a unique way, to make a tangible difference in a war that often felt formless and frustrating. They might have seen a certain macabre allure in the challenge, a test of their own mettle against the ultimate unknown. But even for these volunteers, the reality of the job, once experienced, often far outstripped any initial, perhaps naive expectations. Others found themselves in the role not by choice, but by circumstance. Their size, often a disadvantage in a military built for large men, suddenly became a critical asset. A smaller frame meant the ability to squeeze through tunnels no larger than a drainage pipe, to navigate passages designed for the smaller stature of the Viet Cong. For these soldiers, the path to becoming a tunnel rat was less about a conscious decision and more about an inescapable, brutal necessity of war. There was no formal tunnel rat school, no specialized academy. The training, if you could call it that, was often rudimentary, learned on the job in the most unforgiving of classrooms, the tunnels themselves. Consider what attributes one would need for such a task. Not just physical smallness, but a profound lack of claustrophobia, or at least the ability to suppress it under extreme duress, an unwavering nerve, an almost superhuman control over one's own fear. Imagine being asked if you were good in small spaces. You might nod, thinking of a closet or a small room, but the tunnels, they were a world apart. They redefined small. The moment of realization for many of these soldiers was profound. A jarring shift from the familiar horrors of above-ground combat to an entirely alien realm. The first time they peered into a dark, narrow opening, perhaps little more than a camouflaged hole in the ground, the true nature of their assignment would have begun to sink in. This wasn't just dangerous. It was an inversion of everything they understood about fighting. No air support, no artillery cover, no clear lines of sight. Just you, your minimal equipment, and the suffocating, silent promise of whatever lay in the absolute darkness ahead. It was an internal shift, a psychological recalibration. From a soldier fighting in open air, relying on sight and sound, to a creature of the dark, dependent on touch, on instinct, on the faint whispers of danger. This wasn't about conventional courage. It was about a different kind of bravery, a quiet, internal fortitude that allowed a man to consciously step into a nightmare, repeatedly. The surface world, with all its light and space, would begin to feel distant, a memory from another life. Their world, for hours on end, would become the earth itself, pressing in from all sides. The job demanded a stripping away of comfort, of personal space, of even the most basic human need for light and openness. It was a role that, by its very nature, isolated them, even when working as part of a unit. For once you were inside, You were largely on your own, a single point of light in an otherwise impenetrable black. The transformation was not just physical, but existential. These were not just soldiers, they were becoming something else, something forged in the absolute darkness, ready to face the unseen. They were becoming, whether by choice or by fate, instruments of a war fought in the bowels of the earth. The psychological preparation for becoming a tunnel rat was, for many, an abstract concept before it became a horrifying reality. There were no comprehensive manuals, no dedicated training facilities to meticulously simulate the experience, only the briefest of instructions. Often from a grizzled veteran who had already endured the terror. You might be told to crawl, to listen for subtle sounds, to expect the unexpected, and to always be ready. But how do you truly prepare for absolute, all-encompassing darkness? How do you mentally gird yourself for spaces so tight that your chest might graze both sides, for the unsettling knowledge that a hidden enemy could be inches away, breathing the same stale, heavy air? The truth was, you couldn't. You simply endured. The true training, the brutal induction into this specialized hell, began with the very first descent. Imagine being there, at the mouth of a tunnel, a deceptively small, dark opening in the otherwise vibrant green earth. The sweltering tropical heat and oppressive humidity of the jungle above ground give way instantly to a different, even more intense, kind of oppressive atmosphere below. A heavy, cloying, earthy smell, mixed with the faint, metallic tang of stale, unmoving air, assaults your senses even before you fully enter. With a deep, perhaps shaky breath that feels inadequate even before you've begun, you lower yourself into the hole. The comforting, familiar light of the outside world rapidly shrinks behind you, rapidly consumed by the encroaching, impenetrable blackness, leaving you feeling utterly alone. The initial sensory shock was profound and immediate. The absolute lack of light was the most disorienting factor. Your eyes, accustomed to the sun-drenched Vietnamese landscape, strained and struggled in vain to perceive anything at all. You were, quite suddenly, completely blind, plunged into a primeval darkness that pressed in from all directions, consuming all visual reference points. A small, often unreliable flashlight, sometimes no more powerful than a weak civilian model, became your only fragile portal to sight. It cast a meager, limited beam that seemed to devour more light than it produced. A tiny, struggling beacon against an infinite void. This meager light illuminated only a few inches directly ahead, teasing with dancing shadows and playing cruel tricks on an already strained and terrified mind, making the unseen even more terrifying. Then came the claustrophobia, an intense, visceral reaction that often surprised even those who claimed no prior fear of confined spaces. The tunnels were different. These were not well-engineered, man-made structures with comforting, predictable angles and dimensions. These were crude, organic burrows, often uneven, twisting and maddeningly unpredictable. The earth itself felt alive, almost sentient, pressing against your body from every side. You might find yourself crawling on your belly, sometimes dragging yourself forward with your elbows, your face just inches from the damp, packed dirt. The constant feeling of being irrevocably entombed, of the entire world above disappearing entirely, was a relentless, suffocating companion, a heavy blanket of dread that never lifted. And in this crushing darkness and extreme confinement, the terrifying realization dawned with chilling clarity. Almost everything you had learned and trained for as a conventional soldier was utterly useless, actively working against you. Your standard issue M16 rifle, a powerful weapon designed for open combat and long-range engagements, was far too long to maneuver in the tight, twisting passages. It became an active liability, snagging on the rough earth, making movement slow, noisy, and incredibly clumsy. Instead, you might carry a .45 pistol, a trusty knife, perhaps a small collapsible shovel, and a few grenades. But these felt like pathetically inadequate tools against an unseen, omnipresent enemy operating with intimate knowledge in their own fortified subterranean domain. Your combat helmet, a crucial piece of protective gear for operations above ground, often proved simply too wide for the narrowest points of the tunnels. It would get stuck, impede movement, or even be completely removed to allow passage, leaving your head vulnerable to unseen dangers and close-quarter attacks. Your uniform, designed for jungle camouflage and protection from the elements above, was ill-suited for the constant reality of crawling through dirt and mud. It quickly became caked with grime, heavy, uncomfortable, and a chafing second skin in the suffocating heat and humidity. The very tactics you had been drilled in, fire and maneuver, taking cover, establishing fields of fire, maintaining visual contact, were utterly meaningless here. There was no cover when the earth was literally pressing on you from every side. There were no fields of fire when you could barely see your hand in front of your face, let alone a distant enemy. The enemy, the Viet Cong, had designed these tunnels precisely to negate American technological superiority and conventional military doctrine. They had, with remarkable ingenuity and grim determination, weaponized the very concept of underground warfare, forcing the Allied soldiers to fight on terms that completely reversed the usual advantages. The strategic counterexample of conventional training failing was stark and terrifying. This meant a rapid, brutal, and terrifying education in an entirely new, unwritten form of combat. It was a merciless curriculum where every mistake could cost not just the mission's success, but your very life. You had to learn to move with an almost unnatural silence, to distinguish the natural sounds of the earth settling from the subtle, faint signs of an enemy. You had to learn to interpret the slightest change in air pressure, the faintest, almost imperceptible scent, as a potential warning of a trap or an ambush. Your senses, often dulled by the overwhelming darkness, had to become exquisitely, agonizingly heightened to every other stimulus, every whisper of your primal fear. This was not merely fighting. This was raw survival, reduced to its most fundamental, terrifying form. Each breath became a conscious, labored effort, each tentative movement a desperate gamble. The world above became a distant, almost forgotten dream, and the underground, with its suffocating, silent embrace, became an inescapable, harrowing reality. And with every foot of tunnel cleared, the question lingered: what unseen horror lay just around the next bend? Having made that terrifying descent, leaving the known world behind, the tunnel rat's immediate reality became a brutal, unforgiving physical challenge. Forget the open spaces of the jungle. Inside, the labyrinth was a world designed to compress, to suffocate, to deny human comfort in every conceivable way, wearing you down before you even faced an enemy. This was the initiation, not into combat with a clear opponent, but into a relentless physical battle against the very earth itself, a struggle for mere existence in a dimension never meant for human habitation. The very act of being there was a form of slow, agonizing torture. Imagine, if you will, a space so incredibly narrow that the damp, packed earth presses against both your shoulders simultaneously, a relentless embrace that permits no freedom of movement. These were not spacious corridors, but often little more than human-sized burrows, sometimes barely 25 inches wide, a dimension almost unthinkable for an adult to comfortably inhabit. At these extreme points, your chest might scrape the rough ceiling while your knees dragged through the mud below, or you might have to twist your torso at an agonizing, unnatural angle just to squeeze through, your bones grinding against the earth. You might find yourself navigating sections where the ceiling was so low that you couldn't even lift your head, forced to crawl on your belly, pushing yourself forward with your elbows and knees, your face just inches from the rough, unyielding dirt that filled your nostrils with its heavy, cloying scent. Every single inch of progress was earned through grit and searing pain. Each breath felt labored and shallow, each movement a profound struggle against the very earth itself, which seemed to actively resist your presence, making every step a monumental effort. It was a constant, intimate confrontation with the ground beneath you, a physical battle of attrition just to exist in this subterranean realm, where every foot gained was a testament to sheer, painful will, slowly grinding away your strength and your very sense of self. The darkness, which had been a disorienting shock upon entry, now became an active, suffocating presence, a physical weight pressing against your eyes and mind. It wasn't merely the absence of light. It was a heavy, palpable void that seemed to absorb all sound, swallow any sense of direction, and amplify your deepest, most primal fears. Your flashlight, if it still worked, was a fragile, flickering hope against an infinite blackness, its weak beam only highlighting the immediate claustrophobia and the coarse texture of the tunnel walls just inches from your face. This meager, struggling light created distorted shadows that twisted and writhed with every tremor of your hand, playing cruel tricks on an already strained and terrified mind, making the unseen even more terrifyingly vivid. It offered no genuine comfort, only a stark, terrifying reminder of how utterly alone and exposed you truly were, lost in a world without sun, without sky, without end, a profound sensory deprivation that compounded every other physical hardship, leaving your imagination utterly free to conjure its most horrifying terrors in the deep, silent void. And in this crushing confinement, the very air itself became an enemy, a thick, unmoving entity that offered little relief or life-sustaining oxygen. The heat was stifling, a constant, oppressive blanket of tropical warmth trapped and amplified by the Earth's insulating embrace, making the air feel heavy and unbreathable. Humidity hung so heavily it felt like a damp shroud, clinging to your skin, making every surface feel perpetually damp and clammy. Your uniform, designed for the jungle above, quickly became soaked through with sweat and mud, a heavy, chafing burden that restricted movement and added to the suffocation. Sweat streamed down your face in rivers, stinging your eyes, and mixed with the fine dust kicked up by your own labored movements, creating a gritty, uncomfortable, and vision-obscuring film over every inch of exposed skin. Breathing became shallow, the air stale and thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth, stale human sweat, and something else, something indescribable, perhaps the faint scent of decay, or the lingering odor of unseen life that hinted at things dwelling within. It was a constant, low-level assault on your respiratory system, a persistent reminder that even the most basic act of survival, breathing, was a conscious, desperate struggle for a shred of breathable air in a hostile, unventilated tomb. This pervasive heat and moisture contributed to a constant feeling of being unclean, bogged down, perpetually on the verge of exhaustion, and fundamentally compromised in every physical aspect. The sheer physical effort required to move through these tunnels was immense, a full-body workout that quickly drained your reserves, pushing the human body beyond its intended limits of flexibility, strength, and raw endurance. Picture yourself attempting to navigate for minutes, sometimes for hours in such conditions, your entire being screaming in protest, every muscle screaming for release from its agonizing contortion. Your muscles, particularly in your shoulders, back, thighs, and core, screamed with the relentless strain of perpetual contortion. Your joints ached from the unnatural angles, and your body quickly became caked in mud and dirt, a second skin of grime and discomfort adding weight and friction to every excruciating movement. Every twist, every turn, every slight incline or decline demanded a new contortion, a fresh, painful expenditure of precious energy. There was no comfortable position, no opportunity to stretch or relieve the relentless tension that built rapidly in your back, neck, and limbs. You were constantly hunched, twisted or pressed against the unforgiving earth, your body pushed to its absolute limits simply to advance a few more feet. This wasn't merely walking or even crawling. This was a grueling, full-body contortion act, a slow, agonizing dance with exhaustion in a grave of living earth, a constant battle against physical collapse and the onset of debilitating, mind-numbing fatigue. Beyond the immediate constraints of tight spaces, the very structure of the tunnels themselves, crudely dug by hand and often unstable, added another layer of pervasive physical peril, a constant, silent threat. Sometimes, without warning, a tunnel would narrow unexpectedly, not just to 25 inches, but perhaps to a mere 18, forcing you to remove your minimal equipment, your pistol, your knife, your flashlight, push it ahead, and then wriggle through with immense effort, your uniform snagging, skin scraping raw against the rough earth, praying you wouldn't get stuck. Imagine the terror for a moment of being wedged irrevocably in such a space, your arms pinned, unable to move forward or backward, with the immense weight of the earth pressing down from all sides, and the absolute darkness mocking your helplessness. The fear wasn't just of the unseen enemy, it was of the environment itself, a living, breathing antagonist that sought to trap and crush you, a geological predator lurking in the very walls. Every rustle of settling earth, every creak from above, every tiny shower of dirt hinted at a potential collapse, an instant, silent burial, transforming every inch of progress into a desperate gamble with your life, where physical failure meant certain doom and inescapable oblivion. This immediate, pervasive physical impact was profound. It wasn't something that gradually set in. It was an instant, overwhelming reality from the moment you left the surface. Your body was under constant siege, forced to adapt to conditions that fundamentally contradicted human physiology and every instinct for comfort and survival. The tunnels didn't just contain danger, they were danger, actively and ceaselessly. They wore you down, piece by painful piece, stripping away your strength, your breath, and your will before you even faced the enemy within. This was the true nature of entering the labyrinth, a journey into a visceral, suffocating world where the earth itself became the most relentless, suffocating adversary, and every moment was a test of pure, unadulterated endurance against the crushing weight of the world, leaving an indelible mark on body and soul, a permanent scar of subterranean dread. The journey into the labyrinth wasn't just about physical compression. It was a complete rewiring of your senses, a world where the most basic human perceptions were both deprived and overloaded simultaneously, twisting reality into a form of slow, psychological torment. Having been plunged into the absolute darkness, your eyes quickly became useless, straining against an impenetrable void that offered no comfort, no shape, no relief. This wasn't the fleeting darkness of a power outage. This was a deep, primeval black, a visual nothingness that swallowed all light, all reference points, leaving you adrift in a sea of pure, unadulterated absence. Even the faint glow of a cigarette lighter or a weak flashlight beam seemed to be swallowed, barely pushing back the edges of the overwhelming black, making the spaces beyond the light feel even more menacing, even more full of unseen horrors. A constant, terrifying reminder of how utterly alone and exposed you truly were in this lightless tomb. In this profound absence of sight, your other senses, usually secondary in the above-ground world, screamed into overdrive, desperately trying to compensate for the void. Every subtle shift in the environment, every whisper of air, every minute vibration of the earth became magnified, potentially signaling life or death. The air itself, a critical element for human survival, became a palpable, heavy presence. It was often stale, thick with dust and the pervasive smell of damp earth, sometimes tinged with the metallic scent of rust or the faint, unsettling odor of decaying vegetation, perhaps even human waste. Breathing became a conscious, labored effort, each inhale feeling like pulling thick liquid into your lungs, a constant reminder of the suffocating conditions. You could taste the grit of the dust on your tongue, feel its fine particles settle on your sweat-soaked skin, making every surface feel rough and unclean. This thick, unmoving air seemed to press in on you from all sides, adding to the claustrophobia, making you feel trapped not just by the earth, but by the very atmosphere itself. A dense, oppressive blanket that denied fresh oxygen and clean air, slowly depleting your strength and your will. And then there was the sound, or rather, the profound and unsettling lack of it. The tunnels were often enveloped in an oppressive, absolute silence, a vacuum that absorbed all but the most immediate, intimate sounds. In this void, your own ragged breath, the frantic pounding of your heart, the crunch of dirt beneath your elbows and knees, the metallic scrape of your minimal gear against the tunnel walls became deafening. They were the only constant companions in a world designed for stealth and secrecy, turning your own movements into a chorus of potential betrayal, amplifying every internal tremor of fear and anxiety. But this silence could be shattered in an instant by the chilling scuttling of unseen creatures. A rat, a snake, a scorpion, or, far worse, by the faint, almost imperceptible sound of movement that was not your own. A subtle rustle of cloth, a soft shuffle of feet, or the faint distant click of a weapon. These fleeting, disembodied sounds heard through the dense earth would electrify your entire being, turning the terrifying silence into a prelude to potential, sudden violence, a silent alarm that put every nerve on edge, every muscle taut, every thought consumed by the immediate, terrifying threat of imminent ambush, where the unseen enemy held all the cards, waiting in the darkness that was their domain, their home, their weapon. In this realm of sensory extremes, your equipment was minimalist, a stark reflection of the conditions. Your primary tools were often a .45 caliber pistol, a short-barreled weapon that could be drawn and fired in close quarters, unlike the cumbersome M16. A knife, a primitive but essential tool for both combat and clearing obstacles, became an extension of your hand in the pitch black. And, of course, the flashlight, your most vital, yet most frustrating companion. Its beam, as we discussed, was a mere suggestion of light, offering just enough to navigate inches at a time, but also creating more shadows than it dispelled, turning every unseen corner into a canvas for your darkest fears. Often, these were not military-grade flashlights, but standard commercial models. Their batteries often unreliable, their beams fading or dying at the most critical, terrifying moments, leaving you in that absolute suffocating darkness, truly, completely and utterly alone, dependent only on the memory of the way in, and the chilling certainty that something waited just beyond the reach of your failing light. This minimal gear highlighted your vulnerability, underscoring the raw, unadulterated courage required to enter a world where technological advantage was stripped away, leaving you with only your most basic senses and your primal instincts for survival, a fragile human being against a hostile living earth. The constant, inescapable earthy smell permeated everything. It clung to your clothes, to your skin, to your hair. A heavy, musky scent that became synonymous with the tunnels themselves. It was the smell of damp soil, of mold, of decay, a primal odor that deeply ingrained itself into your memory, forever linked with the feeling of claustrophobia and the ever-present threat of the unseen. It was a smell that followed you even after you merged, a phantom scent that lingered, a constant subtle reminder of the dark, suffocating hours spent in the Earth's embrace. This was the sensory world of the tunnel rat, a world of almost total visual deprivation, where sound was either absent or terrifyingly magnified, where the air was thick and heavy, and where the Earth itself, in all its tactile, olfactory, and suffocating reality, became your most intimate, most relentless enemy. Every moment spent within its embrace was a testament to a courage born of pure desperation, a silent struggle to simply exist, inch by painful inch, in a realm that defied every human instinct for light, space, and safety. This constant, overwhelming sensory assault wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a relentless, dehumanizing process that chipped away at a man's sanity, slowly and methodically. Beyond the overwhelming sensory assault and the sheer physical strain, the very architecture of the tunnels presented its own insidious, constant threat. These were not expertly engineered underground bunkers, but often hastily dug, crudely maintained passages, excavated by hand, sometimes for decades, out of the soft, often unstable Vietnamese soil. The Earth itself, in this subterranean world, was a fickle and dangerous adversary, capable of turning on its inhabitants without warning. Imagine traversing a space where the ceiling above you, a mere few inches from your head, was nothing more than packed dirt, occasionally supported by makeshift wooden props that creaked and groaned under the immense weight. Every step, every brush against the wall, every tremor from an above-ground detonation could send a shiver through the earth, releasing showers of dust and small pebbles. These were not just minor irritations. They were terrifying harbingers of potential collapse, a sudden silent burial beneath tons of soil. The thought, the primal fear of being entombed alive, was a constant suffocating presence, a cold dread that clung to you, far more insidious than the most obvious enemy because it was omnipresent and utterly unpredictable. You could almost feel the earth breathing around you, a massive, indifferent entity, always on the verge of reclaiming its space. And it wasn't just major collapses. The tunnels were notorious for their unexpected narrowings, what some called suckholes, designed by the Viet Cong to impede and trap larger American soldiers. You might be crawling steadily, only for the passage ahead to constrict dramatically, sometimes to a mere 18 inches in diameter, a space barely wide enough for a human to squeeze through. To navigate these choke points, you would often have to push your pistol and flashlight ahead, wriggle on your stomach, exhaling deeply to try and compress your chest, your uniform snagging, skin scraping against the abrasive earth, every fiber of your being screaming with claustrophobia and the terrifying thought of getting stuck. Imagine for a moment the sheer paralyzing terror of finding yourself wedged irrevocably, your arms pinned, unable to move forward or backward, the earth pressing in from all sides, and the light of your dying flashlight fading. The very walls seem to close in, threatening to swallow you whole, making every foot of progress a desperate gamble, a test of raw will against the earth's unforgiving embrace. The fear was not just of the enemy, but of the environment itself, an active, living antagonist that could become your tomb at any second. Navigation in these unlit, unmapped mazes was another profound challenge. The tunnels were rarely straight or logical. They twisted and turned, forked into multiple passages, dipped steeply downwards, or ascended sharply, often without any discernible pattern. Compass readings were often unreliable deep underground, and the absolute darkness rendered any visual cues useless. Every junction, every sharp bend, every change in elevation became a fresh source of disorientation and anxiety. Losing your way in such a labyrinth meant almost certain death, either from starvation, lack of oxygen, or falling prey to the enemy who knew every inch of their subterranean home. The mental map you tried to construct in your mind, based on touch and vague memory, was fragile, constantly threatened by the overwhelming sensory deprivation, leaving you in a state of perpetual uncertainty, never truly knowing if the path ahead led to an exit, a trap, or another, even more terrifying dead end. This constant struggle with navigation added a relentless layer of psychological stress to an already perilous mission. The psychological stress of these environmental dangers was immense, a silent, pervasive dread that permeated every moment spent underground. It was a different kind of fear from facing an enemy with a weapon. It was a fear of the very ground beneath you, the air you breathed, the space that confined you. This omnipresent threat of collapse, of being trapped, of becoming hopelessly lost, acted as a relentless, unseen tormentor. It eroded morale, heightened anxiety, and constantly tested the limits of mental endurance. Even when no enemy was present, the tunnels themselves were treacherous, a constant gnawing reminder that death could come not from a bullet, but from the silent, unforgiving embrace of the earth. This psychological burden was as debilitating as any physical injury, slowly chipping away at a man's resolve, transforming the environment from a mere setting into an active, malevolent force, constantly promising an anonymous, suffocating end. Every breath was a silent prayer, every movement a desperate act of defiance against the crushing weight of the world, making the very act of survival a profound, exhausting victory. This persistent, multifaceted threat meant that the tunnel rat was never truly safe, even in moments of apparent calm. The earth was alive, unpredictable, and always capable of delivering a fatal blow. It transformed the mission from a hunt for the enemy into a harrowing struggle against the environment itself. A relentless, claustrophobic battle for air, for space, for light, and ultimately, for life. The tunnels are not merely passages, they are living traps, waiting to ensnare, crush, or disorient, turning every inch of progress into a testament to unimaginable courage and the relentless, suffocating reality of subterranean warfare. Having endured the crushing embrace of the earth, its suffocating darkness, and its physical demands, the tunnel rat then faced an even more insidious enemy, the Viet Cong's cunning, deadly ingenuity. For beneath the surface, the Viet Cong transformed the very ground into a vast, silent killer, a landscape riddled with meticulously placed booby traps and the constant threat of ambush. This wasn't just a battle against the environment, it was a psychological and physical war against an enemy who understood the terror of the unseen and exploited it with brutal precision. They weaponized patience and the element of surprise, turning every inch of excavated earth into a potential grave. Picture, if you can, moving through a tunnel, your senses already on high alert, every nerve jangling from the claustrophobia and the darkness. Now, add the chilling knowledge that every single step you take, every handhold, every loose piece of dirt could trigger a hidden device designed to maim, to kill, or simply to terrify. The psychological impact of this constant expectation of death was arguably as debilitating as the physical dangers themselves. It was a relentless form of torture, a pervasive paranoia that gnawed at the edges of a soldier's sanity, turning every moment into a silent gamble with fate. The air was thick, not just with dust and damp earth, but with the palpable, suffocating dread of the unknown. Among the most infamous of these subterranean horrors were the punji stick traps. Simple, yet brutally effective, these were sharpened bamboo or metal stakes, often coated in filth or poison to ensure infection, concealed in pits or along tunnel floors. A tunnel rat, crawling through the darkness, might inadvertently shift a piece of camouflage or place a hand or knee in the wrong spot, only to plunge into a pit filled with these agonizing spears. The goal wasn't always instant death. Often it was to cause severe, debilitating wounds, turning a soldier into a burden for their comrades, and sowing fear and despair throughout the unit. Imagine the silent, agonizing scream muffled by the earth as your body is impaled in the pitch black, deep underground, far from immediate help. The agony, the infection, the slow, inescapable realization of your predicament. It was a terror designed to break the spirit as much as the body. But the Viet Cong's traps extended far beyond simple punji sticks. They employed tripwires, nearly invisible strands stretched across tunnel passages, connected to grenades or other explosive devices. In the absolute darkness, with limited visibility, even with a flashlight, these tripwires were almost impossible to detect until it was too late. A slight brush, a misplaced foot, and the tunnel would erupt in a flash of light and a deafening roar, sending shrapnel tearing through the confined space with nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. The claustrophobia intensified tenfold in these moments, as the very walls that confined you also trapped the explosion's deadly force. The shockwave alone in such a tight space could be devastating, disorienting, and physically brutal, leaving you dazed, wounded, or worse, deep within the earth, surrounded by rubble and silence, the echoes of the blast still ringing in your ears, and the smell of cordite heavy in the air, a grim testament to the silent, unseen enemy. Then there were the concealed grenades, often rigged to explode when a pressure plate was stepped on, or when a seemingly innocuous object was moved. A tunnel rat might encounter a loose board, a discarded piece of equipment, or a slightly raised patch of earth, all designed to hide a deadly surprise. The temptation to clear obstacles, to create a path forward, was a natural human instinct. But in the tunnels, that instinct could be weaponized against you. Every shadow, every anomaly in the rough-hewn walls or floor became a potential harbinger of doom. The psychological burden of discerning a natural obstruction from a deadly man-made threat was immense, creating a paralyzing indecision that slowed progress and amplified the fear. You became a hyper-vigilant creature, analyzing every grain of dirt, every faint impression, every shift in texture, knowing that a single oversight could lead to a catastrophic immediate end. This constant, exhausting vigilance was a battle in itself, a relentless mental strain that wore down even the most resolute soldier, turning the simple act of movement into a terrifying, high-stakes game of chance. The ingenious cruelty was that the traps themselves often triggered by the most natural of actions, turning human instinct against the soldier, making them their own unwitting executioners in the deep, silent dark, where the enemy was not merely unseen, but often literally beneath your feet, waiting. The Viet Cong's ingenuity in booby-trapping the tunnels extended beyond the obvious, reaching into the darkest corners of psychological warfare. While punji, sticks, and tripwire grenades were devastatingly effective, they were merely the beginning of the horrors awaiting those who dared to venture underground. The sheer variety and perverse cleverness of these devices were a testament to a ruthless determination, designed not just to kill or wound, but to utterly break the spirit of the enemy. Every tunnel rat learned to distrust the very ground they crawled upon, and every moment was a silent prayer against an unseen, often intangible doom. Consider, for instance, the sheer psychological terror of the spider trap. These weren't actual venomous spiders, but often cleverly arranged tripwires designed to mimic the scuttling movement of large insects or arachnids, or even small, spring-loaded devices that would launch a harmless object, creating a sudden, heart-stopping shock in the absolute darkness. While not physically damaging, the immediate visceral fright, the sudden jolt of adrenaline in an already hyper-tense environment, could be as debilitating as a physical wound. Imagine your heart leaping into your throat, your breath catching, your body tensing, all for a shadow, a rustle, or a fake movement in the dark. This constant, low-grade psychological assault chipped away at mental fortitude, making every true danger even more difficult to anticipate and react to. The mind, constantly on the brink, would begin to play tricks, turning every natural sound into a potential threat, every unseen corner into a lair of imagined horrors. Then there were the more complex and gruesome mechanical traps. Some tunnels featured spring-loaded, swinging doors, often disguised as simple sections of wall, that would spring open to impale a soldier with sharpened stakes, or to release a shower of venomous snakes or scorpions directly into their path. Others had box traps, camouflaged pits covered with thin material, beneath which sharp spikes or even live grenades, wired to detonate upon impact, awaited. The sophistication wasn't in their technology, but in their concealment and their ability to exploit the tunnel rat's limited senses. A foot landing on a seemingly firm patch of dirt could trigger a downward swinging door, or cause a section of the floor to collapse, sending you tumbling into a spike pit. These were not random acts of violence, but calculated, meticulously planned instruments of terror, designed to instill a profound sense of powerlessness and impending doom. The true genius and the true horror lay in the sheer unpredictability. A tunnel might be clear for dozens of feet, lulling a tunnel rat into a false sense of security, only for the next bend to conceal a pressure-activated landmine embedded directly into the floor. These mines, often small and rudimentary, could shatter a leg or worse, leaving a soldier screaming in agony, trapped deep within the earth, their cries echoing in the suffocating silence, the metallic tang of cordite filling the air. The chilling truth was that the Viet Cong often retreated deeper into the tunnels after setting these traps, waiting for the screams to confirm their effectiveness, and then often setting up an ambush for those who would inevitably attempt to rescue. It was a cruel, multi-layered strategy that capitalized on human compassion, turning it into a vulnerability. And then, the ultimate terror. Direct, close-quarter combat. Imagine moving slowly, painstakingly through a passage, your flashlight beam barely piercing the gloom, when suddenly you hear a sound, a slight rustle, a faint breath, or perhaps nothing at all but a growing certainty. You are not alone. An enemy soldier, often smaller, more agile, and intimately familiar with the dark contours of their subterranean home, is waiting, perhaps just around a blind bend, or even hiding in a small camouflaged alcove within the tunnel wall, perfectly still, perfectly silent. In these terrifying moments, every instinct honed for conventional warfare was useless. There was no room to maneuver an M16, no ability to call for covering fire, no escape route. The fight was immediate, primal, and often silent. It could be a sudden lunge from the darkness, a swift knife thrust, or the roar of a pistol fired at point-blank range, its muzzle flash momentarily blinding in the absolute black. Hand-to-hand combat, grappling in the mud and dust, feeling the enemy's body pressed against yours in the suffocating confinement, became a horrifying reality. The battle became a visceral struggle for life, where the winner was often simply the one who reacted first, who could strike with brutal efficiency in a world devoid of light and mercy. The fear of the unknown reached its zenith in these encounters. You couldn't see your adversary clearly, you often only sensed them. The fight was fought as much with instinct and raw terror as with any weapon. The claustrophobia that had been a psychological burden now became a direct tactical hindrance, making every movement sluggish, every defensive action difficult. This was combat stripped down to its most brutal, most intimate form. A struggle against a ghost in the dark, where the lines between hunter and hunted blurred, and every shadow seemed to hold a deadly secret. It was a testament to the unimaginable stress placed upon these men, forcing them to fight with a courage that bordered on the superhuman, pushing them past every conceivable limit of human endurance, facing not just death, but an anonymous, suffocating end in the belly of the earth. The echoes of these unseen battles would forever haunt the tunnel rats, a constant reminder of the primal, terrifying reality of close-quarters combat in the profound, unforgiving darkness. Beyond the mechanical and psychological horrors of booby traps and the brutal intimacy of close-quarters struggle, the single most terrifying and persistent threat to a tunnel rat was the constant, pervasive danger of ambush. Imagine, if you will, the Viet Cong, masters of this subterranean domain, waiting patiently in the absolute darkness, completely unseen, with every advantage of position and knowledge of the labyrinthine passages. This was not a fair fight. It was a deadly, asymmetric dance where the tunnel rat was always on the defensive, always reacting, always at the mercy of an enemy who could strike and vanish without a trace, utilizing the very earth as both their sanctuary and their weapon. The feeling of being constantly hunted, of knowing that unseen eyes might be watching your every labored movement, was a torment that transcended physical pain, gnawing at the very core of a soldier's resolve. In the profound, suffocating blackness of the tunnels, your visibility, even with the aid of a weak flashlight, was negligible. The beam only pierced a few inches, creating a tunnel vision that paradoxically magnified your immediate surroundings while obscuring everything else. This extreme limitation of sight was precisely what the Viet Cong exploited. They understood that a soldier's reliance on vision in conventional warfare made them incredibly vulnerable in an environment where sight was useless. They might lie motionless in a small, expertly camouflaged alcove, or within a hidden spur tunnel waiting until a tunnel rat had passed their position, only to emerge silently behind them, cutting off any retreat. Or they might wait just around a blind bend perfectly poised for a sudden, devastating attack from an angle the tunnel rat could not anticipate. This mastery of their environment transformed the tunnels into an extension of their will, a silent, deadly partner in their grim endeavors, making any attempt at conventional combat tactics utterly futile, a profound and terrifying deconstruction of fair engagement. This extreme asymmetry of combat forced tunnel rats to rely on their other senses in ways they never had before. Their ears, despite the oppressive silence, became finely tuned instruments, desperately straining to pick up the faintest sound, the almost imperceptible shift of earth, the whisper of cloth against rough walls, the subtle, rhythmic drip of water, or the faint, distant click of a weapon being readied. Every anomaly, every deviation from the expected sounds of the earth became a potential silent alarm, triggering a surge of adrenaline and a desperate scramble to identify the source of the threat. The air itself could betray an enemy's presence, a faint and unfamiliar scent, perhaps cooking smoke, human waste, or the distinct odor of a particular Viet Cong-issued tobacco, could mean you were not alone, that an unseen adversary was just ahead, breathing the same stale, heavy air. The human sense of touch, too, became crucial. The subtle change in the texture of the tunnel floor, a newly disturbed patch of dirt, or a slight variation in the air pressure, could all signal the immediate presence of a hidden threat or a meticulously placed trap. The psychological toll of this constant threat of ambush was immense. It was not merely the fear of death, but the terror of an unseen, anonymous demise, alone in the dark, without warning. This forced an agonizing moral dilemma upon the tunnel rats. In a world where every shadow could conceal a killer and every sound could be a prelude to attack, the instinct to survive often meant operating on a kill or be killed mentality, where hesitation could be fatal. You had to learn to fire at sounds, at shadows, at anything that stirred in the periphery of your limited perception, knowing that what you engaged might be an animal, or worse, a human being hiding in the dark, indistinguishable from the earth itself. This moral ambiguity, this constant state of hypervigilance, slowly eroded a soldier's humanity, forcing them to become as primal and instinctual as the creatures that shared their subterranean prison. It was a dark, silent battle of wills, where paranoia was not a weakness, but a necessary, terrifying tool for survival. The Viet Cong had an intimate knowledge of their tunnel systems. They knew every dead end, every hidden escape route, every defensive position, every booby trap. For them, these tunnels were not just a place to hide. They were their home, their fortress, their extended weapon system. This home ground advantage was absolute, granting them a tactical superiority that even the most advanced American technology could not overcome. They could melt into the earth, disappearing into concealed bolt holes or side passages at will, only to reappear moments later in an entirely different location, striking from an unexpected quarter. This ability to appear and disappear, to always maintain the element of surprise, was a crushing psychological blow, reinforcing the feeling of fighting a phantom enemy who possessed supernatural abilities, always one step ahead, always lurking, waiting in the profound and unforgiving darkness that was their domain. The constant threat of ambush, therefore, was not merely a physical danger, it was a profound existential challenge. It transformed the tunnels into a living entity, an active participant in the war, constantly testing the limits of human courage, resilience, and sanity. Each step forward was a conscious act of defiance against an enemy who knew every inch of their ground, and against a darkness that promised anonymity and oblivion. The tunnel rat was truly alone, separated from the comforting presence of his unit, in a world where sound and light were betrayers, and where the unseen enemy held an unassailable advantage. This was the ultimate terror, the silent, suffocating reality of a war fought in the dark, where the only certainty was the omnipresent possibility of an unseen, sudden, and inescapable end deep within the unforgiving embrace of the earth. The unrelenting battle against an unseen human enemy, constantly lurking with booby traps and ambushes, was only one dimension of the tunnel rat's nightmare. For beneath the earth, in the same dark, suffocating passages, another, more primal and equally terrifying threat awaited. The tunnels were not just a battlefield, they were a living ecosystem, a hidden world teeming with a terrifying array of venomous creatures, each an additional silent predator in an already deadly environment. It was a constant, nerve-wracking reminder that in this subterranean world, the enemy wasn't always human, and death could come from a fanged mouth or a stinging tail without warning in the absolute dark. Imagine, if you will, the constant low-level hum of anxiety already present, the acute paranoia of every step potentially triggering a trap. Now, layer upon that the chilling dread of encountering a venomous snake, a scorpion, or a large, hairy spider in a space so confined you can barely move, where your only light is a struggling beam, and your only defense is a pistol or a knife. This was a fear that transcended the human conflict. It was a primal, instinctive terror, the ancient fear of the unknown, magnified 1,000-fold by the claustrophobic, lightless embrace of the earth. The psychological burden of knowing that a slip of the hand, a brush against a wall, or a moment of inattention could bring you face to face with a creature whose bite or sting meant agonizing pain, paralysis, or even death was immense. Among the most feared of these subterranean inhabitants were the snakes. Picture a cobra, a crate, or a viper, perfectly camouflaged in the earthy tones, moving silently through the dark passages. These were not slow, docile creatures. They were often aggressive, territorial, and their venom could be devastatingly potent. Encountering one in the open, even in daylight, is a frightening experience. But imagine meeting one in a tunnel so narrow you can't retreat, so dark you can only discern its shape by the flickering, unreliable beam of your flashlight, or worse, by the sudden brush of its scales against your exposed skin. The very thought sends a shiver down the spine. A snake strike in such an environment meant immediate, debilitating danger, a medical emergency deep underground, far from any possibility of rapid evacuation or anti-venom. The silent slithering, the sudden terrifying discovery, the desperate struggle in a confined space. It was a nightmare made real, a constant, chilling possibility that preyed on every tunnel rat's mind. But snakes were not the only slithering terror. Scorpions, with their menacing pincers and venomous stingers, also thrived in the damp, dark conditions of the tunnels. A tunnel rat might inadvertently place a hand on one, or lean against a wall where one was clinging, only to feel the sudden, searing pain of its sting. While not always fatal, a scorpion sting could cause intense, localized pain, swelling, and even temporary paralysis, turning an already perilous situation into a desperate fight for survival. Imagine trying to navigate a treacherous passage, your hand throbbing, your body reeling from the venom, all while still conscious of the human enemy, the booby traps, and the suffocating environment. It was an additional layer of insidious, agonizing torment, a constant reminder of the pervasive hostility of the underground world. The fear wasn't just of the immediate pain, but of the incapacitation, the loss of agility and focus that could prove fatal in a place where every second counted, every movement was critical, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. And then there were the spiders. Not just any spiders, but often large venomous tarantulas and other arachnids whose sudden appearance in the faint glow of a flashlight could induce a visceral, uncontrollable fright. While their bites were rarely fatal, they were incredibly painful and could cause severe localized reactions, adding to the growing list of potential injuries and infections. The psychological effect of seeing a large, hairy spider scuttling across the tunnel wall just inches from your face, or worse, feeling one drop onto your helmet or arm in the absolute darkness, was immense. It chipped away at a soldier's composure, amplifying the already overwhelming sense of dread and paranoia, making them jumpy and hyper-aware of every minute movement around them. This wasn't merely a nuisance, it was a constant, low-grade psychological assault designed to keep a tunnel rat perpetually on edge, their nerves frayed, their focus fragmented, turning every natural part of the tunnel ecosystem into a potential silent killer. The psychological dread of encountering these creatures was immense. It was a fear that permeated every moment spent underground, a silent partner to the fear of human enemies and booby traps. The sheer unpredictability of these encounters, the fact that these creatures could be anywhere, at any time, amplified the terror. You could not negotiate with them, could not anticipate their movements with tactical precision. They were simply there, an inherent, terrifying part of the subterranean world, embodying the raw, untamed danger of a realm utterly divorced from the familiar world above. The knowledge that a single, unfortunate encounter with a venomous creature could end your mission or your life in a slow, agonizing manner added an unbearable weight to an already impossible task. It was a constant, gnawing fear that whispered in the darkness, reminding you that even if you avoided the Viet Cong's traps and ambushes, the very environment itself was still a lethal, living adversary, always waiting to claim its next victim. Beyond the sudden, terrifying strike of a snake or the searing pain of a scorpion's sting, the tunnels harbored an even more pervasive, relentless enemy, disease and infection. In this subterranean world, far removed from any semblance of hygiene, every cut, every scratch, every insect bite became a potential gateway for pathogens, slowly but surely eroding a soldier's health and morale. The constant dampness, the lack of sunlight, and the omnipresent filth created a perfect breeding ground for ailments that could debilitate a man just as effectively as a bullet, but with a far more insidious, drawn-out torment. Imagine living for hours, sometimes days, in an environment where fresh air was a luxury and stagnant water collected in pools along the floor. Human waste, often disposed of crudely, if at all, contaminated the very air you breathed and the surfaces you touched. This was not merely uncomfortable, it was a biological weapon, silently at work, turning the tunnels into a microbial battlefield. Skin infections, festering wounds, and tropical ulcers were common, exacerbated by the constant rubbing against rough earth and the inability to properly clean oneself. A small abrasion, ignored in the heat of a mission, could quickly transform into a painful, debilitating infection, making every movement a torment and severely impacting a tunnel rat's ability to perform their dangerous tasks. You were, quite literally, immersed in a soup of bacteria and fungi, a constant assault on your body's defenses. Dysentery and other gastrointestinal illnesses were rampant, spreading rapidly through the units due to contaminated food and water and the sheer lack of sanitation. Picture the agony of acute diarrhea or vomiting in a space so narrow you could barely turn over, where relief was impossible and the constant fear of being discovered by the enemy was ever present. These illnesses not only sapped a soldier's strength and focus, but also stripped away their dignity, forcing them to endure unimaginable discomforts in conditions that offered no privacy or solace. The relentless cycle of sickness and exhaustion meant that even when not actively engaged in combat, a tunnel rat's body was under constant siege, fighting an invisible war within itself, depleting their energy, their focus, and their will to continue. And then, of course, there were the rats, swarms of them. Not just the common field rats you might encounter above ground, but often large, emboldened creatures perfectly adapted to their dark, subterranean existence. They scuttled through the passages, gnawed at discarded rations, and most disturbingly, scurried over sleeping soldiers in the dead of night. The psychological impact of these omnipresent vermin was profound. They were vectors for disease, carrying pathogens like leptospirosis and bubonic plague, adding another layer of terrifying unseen threats. But beyond the physical danger, their constant presence was a relentless assault on morale. They symbolized the squalor, the degradation, and the utter lack of control a tunnel rat experienced. To be forced to share your already cramped, terrifying living space with dozens of these repulsive creatures, to feel their tiny feet scurrying across your face or body in the pitch black, was a constant, dehumanizing torment, a pervasive reminder of the unspeakable conditions you were forced to endure, eroding any remaining sense of comfort or safety. Other vermin, such as lice, fleas, and various types of biting insects, also thrived in the tunnel's damp, dark conditions, bringing with them their own host of diseases and relentless itching. Imagine the ceaseless irritation, the inability to find relief from the constant biting and crawling sensations, all while trying to maintain focus in a life or death situation. These minor, yet constant annoyances compounded the physical discomfort and psychological stress, slowly grinding down a soldier's resilience. The tunnels were not just a place where you fought the enemy. They were a place where you fought your own body, your own mind, and every insidious pestilence that flourished in the dark, unwashed depths. The combined impact of these unsanitary conditions and omnipresent vermin on health and morale was catastrophic. Tunnel rats often emerged from their missions physically depleted, riddled with infections, and suffering from chronic illnesses. The distinction between the relatively cleaner, though still harsh, world above ground and the festering disease-ridden environment below was stark. Above, you might battle the jungle. Below, you battled the very essence of decay and putrefaction. This constant battle against invisible threats meant that a tunnel rat's body and spirit were under ceaseless assault. They were fighting not just for tactical objectives, but for their very physiological integrity, for the ability to simply function amidst a constant barrage of illness and discomfort. The knowledge that even if you survived an ambush or a trap, a slow, insidious disease could still claim you, added another layer of grim despair to an already impossible task, a profound and inescapable reality that truly underscored why it sucked to be a Vietnam tunnel rat, enduring a war not just against an enemy, but against the very elements of life itself, twisted into agents of relentless suffering and degradation, leaving an indelible mark on body, mind, and soul, a perpetual struggle, against an environment designed to break down every aspect of human endurance and well-being. Having navigated the crushing physicalities, the relentless booby traps, and the primal threats of the tunnel's living ecosystem, the tunnel rat was then subjected to an even more insidious, pervasive enemy, the war waged entirely within their own mind. This was a psychological torment so profound, so ceaseless, that it often left deeper, more lasting scars than any physical wound. It was a constant battle against the self, a silent struggle in the dark, where the most terrifying adversary was often one's own unraveling sanity, pushed to the absolute breaking point by an environment designed to obliterate human comfort and peace. The claustrophobia, the fear, the paranoia, the profound isolation, these were not mere inconveniences. They were the very fabric of the tunnel rat's existence, slowly but relentlessly wearing down their spirit, day after agonizing day. Imagine, if you will, the relentless grip of extreme claustrophobia. This was not simply discomfort in a small space, it was a visceral, primal terror, a suffocating panic that clawed at your throat, tightened your chest, and made every breath feel inadequate. The earth pressed in from all sides, above, below, and from the left and right, a constant, unyielding embrace that threatened to crush you, to swallow you whole. There was no escape, no wider space to retreat to, no open sky to gaze upon. For hours on end, you were literally entombed, your body screaming for release from the constant physical contact with the rough, damp earth. This incessant feeling of being irrevocably trapped, of being slowly buried alive, was a psychological torture that relentlessly eroded a man's composure, turning the very act of moving forward into a profound act of mental defiance against an overwhelming primal fear. It was a suffocating dread that, once it took hold, was almost impossible to shake. A constant hum of terror beneath every thought, every action, and coupled with this unyielding claustrophobia was the constant, pervasive presence of fear. Not just the fear of a sudden ambush or an exploding trap, though those were ever present, but a deeper, more insidious fear of the unknown. The absolute darkness bred a terrifying uncertainty, allowing the mind to conjure its most horrifying scenarios. Every creak of settling earth, every drip of water, every distant, unidentifiable sound was amplified into a potential threat, transforming the imagination into a cruel enemy. You were operating on pure instinct, your nerves frayed, your adrenaline perpetually coursing, keeping you in a state of hypervigilance that was utterly exhausting. This fear wasn't a fleeting emotion, it was a heavy, suffocating blanket that wrapped itself around you, chilling you to the bone, a relentless, gnawing dread that became your closest companion in the silent, suffocating depths. It created a perception of extended time, where minutes felt like hours, and hours stretched into an eternity of silent, terrifying anticipation, each second pregnant with the possibility of sudden, violent death. This constant fear quickly blossomed into profound paranoia. In an environment where the enemy was unseen, cunning, and omnipresent, every shadow, every subtle shift in the air, every faint odor became suspect. Was that a Viet Cong soldier hiding in an alcove just ahead? Was that patch of disturbed earth a sign of a new trap? Was the almost imperceptible change in the tunnel's texture a deliberate alteration? The mind, deprived of reliable visual cues, began to fill the blanks with the most terrifying possibilities. Trust in your senses became a double-edged sword, as your heightened awareness sometimes led to false alarms, further eroding confidence and amplifying the sense of being perpetually hunted. You couldn't trust what you saw or didn't see, what you heard or even what you felt. This confirmation bias, where every anomaly seemed to reinforce the idea of constant danger, turned the tunnels into a living psychological prison, where your own mind became a battleground, constantly fighting against imagined threats that were indistinguishable from the very real ones lurking in the absolute, unforgiving darkness. Perhaps the most dehumanizing aspect was the sensory deprivation, combined paradoxically with sensory overload. Your eyes, useless in the pitch black, strained for non-existent light, while your ears, skin, and nose were assaulted by magnified, disorienting stimuli. The oppressive silence could be as terrifying as any sound, amplifying the inner turmoil, turning your own heartbeat into a frantic drum against the earth. This absence of normal sensory input, of the familiar sights and sounds of the world above, created a profound disassociation. You were cut off, adrift in a void, your sense of self beginning to fray at the edges, losing connection with the reality of the surface. This continuous, relentless sensory assault and deprivation broke down the usual coping mechanisms, leaving a soldier utterly exposed to their deepest fears, transforming them from a human being into a creature of pure, raw instinct, desperately struggling against an environment designed to obliterate not just the body, but the very essence of human connection and consciousness. And in this terrifying crucible, the tunnel rat was utterly alone. While above ground, soldiers fought as part of a unit. With the comforting presence of comrades, air support, and artillery below, the individual tunnel rat descended into a world of profound isolation. Once you entered that dark hole, you were largely cut off from your unit above. Communications were often unreliable, impossible, or too dangerous to use. Your comrades were somewhere above, distant and unreachable, fighting a different war. You were a single point of light, a solitary soul venturing into a world of absolute darkness, separated by tons of earth from any immediate support, any comforting voice, any helping hand. This feeling of being utterly alone, of facing unimaginable horrors without immediate backup, without even a shared glance of camaraderie, was a psychological weight almost too heavy to bear. It was a deep, chilling isolation that bred a unique form of courage, but also an even deeper, more pervasive sense of vulnerability and abandonment. The profound separation from your unit above ground compounded every other psychological burden, making each mission a deeply personal, terrifying journey into a self-imposed, silent hell, where the only companion was the ever-present, suffocating dread of absolute isolation. In the face of such overwhelming psychological siege, the relentless claustrophobia, the gnawing fear, the suffocating paranoia, and the profound isolation, a unique and almost unfathomable type of courage was forged. This wasn't the adrenaline-fueled bravery of a charge across an open field, or the calculated heroism of a tactical maneuver under fire. This was a quiet, internal fortitude, a daily, moment-by-moment decision to consciously step back into the abyss, to confront the deepest, most primal human fears, not once, but repeatedly, day after agonizing day. It was a sustained act of sheer mental will, a profound defiance against an environment designed to strip away every vestige of sanity, demanding an almost superhuman resilience just to endure. This was courage born of grim necessity, a relentless struggle to maintain composure and purpose when every instinct screamed for flight, for light, for air, for escape. It was a constant internal battle, fought in the silence of one's own mind, against an enemy as terrifying as any Viet Cong soldier, the unraveling of one's own sanity. Yet this immense mental fortitude, this extraordinary resilience walked a razor-thin line. The human psyche, for all its strength, has its limits. And in the tunnels, those limits were tested to destruction. The line between unwavering bravery and a catastrophic psychological breakdown was often indistinguishable, a fragile barrier that could shatter without warning. For some, the pressure became too much. The constant darkness, the omnipresent fear, the suffocating isolation, all combined to crack the strongest of wills. A soldier might suddenly refuse to go back down, or become paralyzed by an uncontrollable panic attack deep within a passage, unable to move, unable to function. Others might retreat into a terrifying internal silence, their eyes vacant, their minds lost to the horrors they had endured, unable to process the normal world once they re-emerged. The tunnels were not just physically demanding, they were soul-crushing, capable of leaving men alive but fundamentally broken, their inner landscape ravaged beyond repair. The strategic counterexample of mental fortitude breaking wasn't always a dramatic event. Sometimes it was a slow, insidious erosion, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell, a ghost haunted by the darkness. And in this hellish, subterranean world, the moral landscape became as twisted and confusing as the tunnels themselves. The very nature of combat in such confined, lightless spaces blurred the lines of engagement, forcing tunnel rats into agonizing moral ambiguities. In the absolute darkness, where an enemy could be inches away, unseen, unheard until the last fatal second, the choice often reduced itself to a brutal, primal equation. Kill or be killed. You couldn't always identify your target clearly. Sometimes you fired at a sound, a shadow, a fleeting impression of movement in the pitch black, knowing it could be an animal, but fearing it was a human adversary. The moral cost of such warfare was immense, forcing men to make split-second life-or-death decisions in conditions that offered no clarity, no opportunity for reflection, and no quarter. This constant state of hypervigilance, this necessity to operate on pure, aggressive instinct, slowly eroded a soldier's sense of humanity. The conventional rules of engagement, the ethical frameworks learned in training, often dissolved in the suffocating reality of subterranean combat. You became a creature of the dark, adapting to its brutal demands, fighting with a primal ferocity that left an indelible mark on your soul. The enemy was not just the Viet Cong, it was the darkness, the fear, the claustrophobia, and the brutal decisions you were forced to make in order to survive. This was the moral dilemma, sacrificing a piece of yourself, your inherent empathy, your sense of right and wrong, just to make it through another day, another tunnel, another breath in the earth's suffocating embrace. The courage of the tunnel rats, therefore, was not a simple, heroic tale. It was a testament to rewarded vulnerability, a profound demonstration of what humans could endure when pushed beyond every conceivable limit. These were men who consciously chose, or were forced, to confront their deepest fears, to descend into a living hell, and to fight a war that offered no glory, only survival, and a lingering sense of dread. Their mental fortitude was a fragile, precious thing, constantly besieged, constantly on the verge of splintering. They returned from the tunnels carrying not just the grime of the earth, but the invisible, searing scars of a psychological battle fought in the profound, unforgiving darkness, a silent testament to the unimaginable cost of their unique and horrifying mission. The war in the tunnels never truly ended for them. It merely moved from the physical world to the silent, echoing chambers of their minds, a haunting legacy of courage, fear, and profound moral compromise. The intense psychological and physical battles waged by the tunnel rats unfolded against a backdrop often forgotten, the lives of the Viet Cong who inhabited and mastered these subterranean realms. To truly understand the unimaginable hardships faced by American and Allied soldiers, it is crucial to momentarily shift our perspective, to acknowledge the extraordinary resilience, ingenuity, and sheer determination of the enemy. These tunnels were not merely a tactical advantage, they were a way of life, a strategic masterpiece of adaptation and a testament to an unwavering commitment that fundamentally contextualizes the tunnel rats' grim struggle. Imagine, if you will, the Viet Cong soldier, often a peasant farmer by day, a guerrilla fighter by night, existing in these tunnels, not as a temporary hiding place, but as a semi-permanent home. They were the architects, the engineers, and the primary inhabitants of this hidden world. From its initial crude excavations, expanded often over decades, inch by painstaking inch, using rudimentary tools like hoes, shovels, and even their bare hands, they carved out a labyrinth that defied conventional warfare. This wasn't merely a network of fighting positions. It was an entire underground society, a complex organism woven into the very earth, designed to sustain life and wage war simultaneously. Their ingenuity was born of necessity and deep understanding of their own environment. Unlike the Allied forces who struggled to adapt to the cramped, dark conditions, the Viet Cong were perfectly suited. Their smaller stature allowed them to navigate passages that were a claustrophobic nightmare for larger American soldiers. They understood the soil, the water tables, the ventilation challenges, and the ways to conceal entrances so effectively that they were often invisible even from close proximity above ground. They created sophisticated air filtration systems, sometimes involving perforated buckets and bamboo shafts, to allow oxygen to circulate and dissipate cooking smoke. Hidden storage areas for weapons, food, and medical supplies were commonplace, ensuring self-sufficiency for extended periods deep beneath the surface. Their mastery of this subterranean world was absolute. They knew every twist, every turn, every hidden bolt hole, every secret escape route within their vast networks. For them, the tunnels were not disorienting mazes, but familiar corridors, a tactical map ingrained in their very being. They moved through them with a practiced ease, a silent efficiency that spoke of countless hours spent in the darkness, of generations perhaps, who had come to view the earth not as an obstacle, but as a shield and an extension of their will. This intimate knowledge provided them with an unparalleled advantage during ambushes, allowing them to appear from unexpected angles and vanish just as quickly, frustrating and terrifying their adversaries. Daily life within these tunnels was a stark testament to their resilience. While not comfortable by any standard, they managed to create a functional existence. Underground kitchens, often expertly vented to avoid detection, prepared meager meals. Makeshift hospitals, though rudimentary, provided essential medical care to the wounded and sick, far from the reach of bombing raids. Sleeping quarters, though cramped, offered some respite from the dangers above. They even established command centers, meeting rooms, and training areas, ensuring continuity of command and the constant indoctrination of new recruits. The light of day was a distant memory for many, their bodies adapting to the constant dimness or absolute darkness, their senses heightened to the subtle cues of their subterranean home. This deep immersion in the underground, this complete adaptation to a life beneath the surface, allowed the Viet Cong to wage a protracted war against a technologically superior enemy. It was a war of endurance, of patience, and of a profound understanding of their terrain. For the tunnel rats, this meant facing an enemy who was not merely hidden, but utterly at home in the very environment that was actively trying to break them. The Viet Cong's ability to survive, to fight, and to sustain themselves within these dark labyrinths transformed their struggle from a mere insurgency into a testament to human will, and in doing so amplified the sheer, unimaginable challenge faced by those who dared to invade their subterranean domain, making the tunnel rats' mission not just dangerous, but a descent into an alien world where the enemy held every conceivable advantage. A grim and constant reminder of why their task was so uniquely horrific. But the story of the tunnel rats does not end with their emergence from the earth. The true, enduring cost of their service, the delayed payoff of their unimaginable experiences, manifested long after the last shots were fired and the tunnels were abandoned. The short-term and long-term effects on these soldiers were profound, leaving physical injuries that often went unacknowledged and psychological scars that lingered for decades, sometimes for an entire lifetime. For many, the war truly ended not on a battlefield, but in the silent, echoing chambers of their own minds, a battle they continued to fight every single day. Physically, the constant crawling, the contorted positions, the scrapes and cuts, the exposure to disease and unsanitary conditions left many tunnel rats with chronic pain, respiratory issues, and lingering infections. Their bodies bore the indelible marks of their time in the Earth's embrace, a constant physical reminder of the hell they endured. But far more insidious and often invisible were the psychological wounds. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, became a silent epidemic among these veterans. The extreme claustrophobia, the constant fear of sudden unseen death, the paranoia, the sensory deprivation, and the profound isolation they experienced carved deep grooves into their psyches. Simple things, like being in an elevator, a crowded room, or even the feeling of darkness could trigger flashbacks, panic attacks, and an overwhelming sense of dread, transporting them instantly back to the suffocating tunnels. The world above ground, once a distant dream, now felt alien, even threatening. Its openness, sometimes as overwhelming as the tunnel's confinement. Their unique experiences were often misunderstood, even dismissed by those who had not walked those dark paths. How could one explain the terror of fighting hand to hand in absolute darkness, the the feeling of the earth pressing in from all sides, or the chilling dread of a scorpion crawling over your face in the middle of the night. These were not conventional battles, and their trauma, therefore, was often beyond the comprehension of their peers, their families, and even the military structures designed to support them. This lack of understanding often led to further isolation, deepening the wounds and leaving many to fight their silent battles alone, long after the fanfare of war had faded. The lasting legacy of the tunnel rats is one of quiet, extraordinary courage, tempered by an immense, often invisible cost. They represent a unique and grim chapter in military history. Men who descended into the earth's belly to fight a war on terms that defied every human instinct for survival and comfort. Their stories are a poignant reminder of the true, unvarnished reality of warfare, stripping away any romanticized notions to reveal the raw, brutal human sacrifice. They were asked to do the unimaginable, and they did it, leaving an enduring mark on their own lives and on the annals of human endurance, a testament to the profound and inescapable truth that, for them, it truly, profoundly sucked to be a Vietnam tunnel rat, a reality that echoed through every silent battle they fought long after the war was done. But the story of the tunnel rats does not end with their emergence from the earth. The true, enduring cost of their service, the delayed payoff of their unimaginable experiences, manifested long after the last shots were fired and the tunnels were abandoned. The short-term and long-term effects on these soldiers were profound, leaving physical injuries that often went unacknowledged and psychological scars that lingered for decades, sometimes for an entire lifetime. For many, the war truly ended not on a battlefield, but in the silent, echoing chambers of their own minds, a battle they continued to fight every single day. Physically, the constant crawling, the contorted positions, the scrapes and cuts, the exposure to disease and unsanitary conditions left many tunnel rats with chronic pain, respiratory issues, and lingering infections. Their bodies bore the indelible marks of their time in the earth's embrace, a constant physical reminder of the hell they endured. But far more insidious and often invisible were the psychological wounds. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, became a silent epidemic among these veterans. The extreme claustrophobia, the constant fear of sudden unseen death, the paranoia, the sensory deprivation, and the profound isolation they experienced carved deep grooves into their psyches. Simple things, like being in an elevator, a crowded room, or even the feeling of darkness could trigger flashbacks, panic attacks, and an overwhelming sense of dread, transporting them instantly back to the suffocating tunnels. The world above ground, once a distant dream, now felt alien, even threatening. Its openness, sometimes as overwhelming as the tunnel's confinement. Their unique experiences were often misunderstood, even dismissed by those who had not walked those dark paths. How could one explain the terror of fighting hand-to-hand in absolute darkness, the feeling of the earth pressing in from all sides, or the chilling dread of a scorpion crawling over your face in the middle of the night? These were not conventional battles, and their trauma, therefore, was often beyond the comprehension of their peers, their families, and even the military structures designed to support them. This lack of understanding often led to further isolation, deepening the wounds and leaving many to fight their silent battles alone long after the fanfare of war had faded. The lasting legacy of the tunnel rats is one of quiet, extraordinary courage, tempered by an immense, often invisible, cost. They represent a unique and grim chapter in military history. Men who descended into the earth's belly to fight a war on terms that defied every human instinct for survival and comfort. Their stories are a poignant reminder of the true, unvarnished reality of warfare, stripping away any romanticized notions to reveal the raw, brutal human sacrifice. They were asked to do the unimaginable, and they did it, leaving an enduring mark on their own lives and on the annals of human endurance, a testament to the profound and inescapable truth that, for them, it truly, profoundly sucked to be a Vietnam tunnel rat, a reality that echoed through every silent battle they fought long after the war was done. As our journey through the dark, unforgiving labyrinth of the Vietnam tunnels concludes, we are left with a profound understanding of the unimaginable hardships faced by the tunnel rats. We've explored the crushing claustrophobia, suffocating darkness, brutal booby traps, primal fears of venomous creatures, and the immense psychological toll of isolation. Their story is a stark truth. For these brave men, it truly, unequivocally, sucked to be a Vietnam tunnel rat. Yet, within this harrowing narrative, we also find a testament to the extraordinary human spirit for courage, adaptation, and unyielding survival against absolute despair. These men pushed past every limit, revealing a quiet bravery born from the earth's very bowels. Their sacrifices and struggles serve as a powerful reminder of war's true cost. As you drift now, let these reflections settle gently. Consider the strength found in adversity and the importance of understanding every chapter of our history. If this deep dive offered you thoughtful reflection or deeper understanding, please like this video. Your click helps YouTube share these vital stories of courage and sacrifice, ensuring they are remembered. If you feel connected to these narratives or wish to honor their courage, leave a comment. Simply, I remember the tunnel rats. And let your words be a testament to their enduring impact and your commitment to historical understanding. If you value these deep explorations, join our community. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future journeys into untold stories. Together, let us continue to learn, reflect, and never forget. Now, take a moment for yourself. Let the gentle sounds and silence guide you. Allow these stories to settle, transforming reflection into peaceful calm. Drift now into the quiet embrace of rest, carrying a deeper understanding of resilience. May your rest be profound and peaceful.